Mac Rhodes at 420. Chris Hummer, 247, college football writer, joins us on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Chris, what was your reaction when you started to learn a little bit? And have you ever heard of Brett Yormark? But his resume as a businessman seems to be very, very good.
Yeah, new name for me. I won't lie. I don't deal with the entertainment circles very frequently. So when that started to pop up yesterday, I was a bit surprised. But I will say, I know the Big 12 has been trying to be as creative as possible, trying to fill that role, given the many challenges on the horizon for college athletics. And obviously, it's been a turbulent, I guess, 2 or 3 years now, going back to the start of COVID. So in a lot of ways, this makes sense, pulling the lens back a little bit. So I think it's an interesting move, but in some ways a smart one for the Big 12 moving forward.
Yeah, Chris, I think anybody who says they know a lot about Brett Yormark that's in our business today is probably pretending, to put it nicely. So with the new thing with the new commissioner and outside the box hire like the Pac-12, how important do you think it is for conferences like the Pac-12, which was incredibly poorly run, and the Big 12, where disaster seemingly looms around every corner, to think well outside the box?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on who you talk to. I don't think Bob Bowlesby did a terrible job. He was certainly blindsided and lost his 2 most important pieces to the SEC. But I live in Austin. That was a really well kept secret, if we're being honest. And obviously, it's a problem that Texas and Oklahoma moved on. But Bob Bowlesby was very well respected. But I would say Bowlesby was a little more rigid in his thinking about athletic function, a lot more traditional. A legend in the industry, no question, but someone who takes a different vantage point, kind of one of the old guard. I think moving forward, and we've seen this with the last 3 commissioners at the top 5 level, they've all come from outside traditional, or at least 3 of the last 4. They've all come from the traditional college athletic circles. And I think experiences in this case, a lot of things going to be moving forward. I think we're getting towards eventually players being able to union.
Okay,
going to be important.
Chris, we're losing you on the cell, and sorry about that. We missed part of what you were saying. We've got some of it, but we'll try to see if we can reestablish that as well. That's happened a lot.
That's happening a lot lately. I don't know what's going on. That's happening every single show. There's some sort of issue with that phone call.
And it could be because of just how the cell service works, but rebooting that. We'll have Chris Hummer back with us here momentarily as well on Brett Yormark, and apparently he will be named. In reports, again, Ross Dellinger last night, SI.com, the Big 12 commissioner, and is their leading candidate. That's going to happen. And then I spoke to somebody today, as I mentioned earlier, and it's just a matter. It won't be official today, but it will be official very, very soon as well. The feedback on the chat room seems to be, hey, give him a chance.
Yeah.
It also seems to be they love the fact that not everybody, but thinking outside the box, and the possibility that this is something that is desperately needed because of the eventual new TV deal, and also just even if you had a really good TV deal, finding other ways, additional ways to bring in revenue for the conference.
Yeah, I mean, what's the worst that can happen? They're going to have the conference fold? I mean, yeah, that is the worst that could happen, but how close were they to that just, I don't know, this time a year ago? It felt like pretty dadgum close, and certainly the trajectory that they were on at the time, clearly they needed a little bit of a jolt, and Bob Bowlesby was able to give them a little bit of that with these 4 teams, but now 4 teams coming in brand new, have a little bit of an overlap, however long that ends up being with OU and Texas, but in the meantime, you have a guy who's a fresh pair of eyes, and you got a fresh set of teams. So there's a lot of new and a lot of new opportunities hopefully on the horizon for the Big 12, but that's going to be his job ultimately, is to create those opportunities, create those partnerships, and he certainly comes from a background where he's been able to do that. But again, it's one thing to sell the Brooklyn Nets and Kevin Durant and, Kyrie Irving. It's another thing to sell Matt Campbell and Ames or Dave Aranda and Waco. And I know he's not selling them individually, but it's the brand. That's the brand, right? And the brand for the Big 12 has been Oklahoma and Texas this entire time in its existence. And for a little while is also, you could say, Nebraska or A&M. But, I mean, what is the brand of the Big 12 now? It's the brand of no blue bloods, to speak of, really, and really not at all. I mean, you could argue Kansas in basketball, maybe argue another sport for somebody else, but I mean, football, blue blood wise, they're pretty much not.
Yeah, but I get what you're saying, but it sounds like you're almost like, why are they here? The group of five, they're not going to just like lay down and give up.
Well, that's my point, is that they kind of have been that team that is not even regarded as a group of five by some. They've now lost two of their biggest weapons, and I'm saying, like, how's this guy going to sit there and rejuvenate the product and reinvigorate the interest and make it an interesting, fun, conference to follow, and not a stale product, so to speak. That's all I'm not saying they're not. I don't know.
No, I think the Big 12 had three, what you could call back when it began, Texas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska blue bloods. K-State was good, and there were times A&M was good, and there's times Colorado was good, but they're all gone, and Nebraska's been gone for quite some time. We'll get Chris Humber back again. Craig, Paul, were you asking the question to him? I forgot who was the response that Chris was giving us.
Yeah, just about how important it was for the conferences. And Chris, thanks for bearing with us there. For the conferences, two things outside the box that aren't the SEC and Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And sorry about the phone issues, guys. I need to think outside the box on my cellular plan, it sounds like. But yeah, I think it's really important. Obviously, the SEC and the Big Ten are the power players. We see that from their conference revenue share and their projected conference revenue share, which even in a couple of years is expected to dwarf the other three Power 5 conferences. So the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the ACC have a lot of catch-up to do. And there's a lot of opportunities out there for potential revenue, and there's a lot of kind of sea changes out there on the horizon, and looking outside the traditional groupthink in college athletics is not a bad thing. Like, we see how poorly mismanaged college athletics is right now, and kind of getting outside that box is not a terrible thing at all. And I think that's, talking to some people in the Big 12, I think that's something they had in mind with this hire. And like, I don't know if it's going to work. Like, you got a long road to climb to catch up to where the SEC and the Big Ten are. But like, if you're the Big 12 and you hope to survive long term, you have to take big swings. And I think this is a big swing.
Chris, you mentioned that you live down in Austin. Well, I mean, anybody living anywhere who's got Twitter has seen some type of reaction to the Arch Manning commitment, and those who follow college football closely have certainly heard his name and probably seen the rush of commits that UT has had since Arch Manning's commitment. Just your thoughts on how big of a get that was for the Longhorns moving forward, not just on the field, but as much off the field as anything else, it seems.
Yeah, it's pretty big. I was actually at the Manning Academy last week. I was there when Arch Manning committed. He wasn't at the camp, but the buzz even there was palpable. It was all anybody was asked about all weekend. Unfortunately, I didn't really get to see a chance to see Arch throw. He sat out for the weekend, but it's a monumental thing, and part of that's his last name. It's just a huge part of his identity, whether he wants it to be or not. Certainly. It is going to be a big part of who he is forever. But he's also a 5-star quarterback, a legitimate potential program changer, the number 1 overall player in the country. And those players tend to be Pied Pipers, and we're seeing that right now. Texas's class has added commitment after commitment the last few days, and they're far from done. There are several high-profile targets out there for Texas that they are likely the favorite for. So Texas is now, I believe, the number 3 class in the 2023 cycle. Could go even higher, and long term, if Texas is good this year, you've got Quinn Ewers first, and then Arch Manning right after that. That's the way you want to transition the SEC, with 2 franchise quarterbacks back to back. And Texas, if it plays its cards right and manages to put everything together, has a chance to be where it hasn't been in a long time, and that's relevant in college football and consistently winning football games.
I thought one of the cool stories today was that K.D. Davis, the really good linebacker from North Texas, was going to get poached by somebody, visited Ole Miss, and I think Texas A&M. Apparently, there were others involved. Would not be surprised if it would have also been some of the others that have, of course, have been relevant in the transfer portal. He got offers basically from everybody. How cool was it that North Texas somehow got a guy that was in the portal, would have hurt them. They've lost 2 elite defensive linemen, but they saved the day with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I sat in Seth Petrell's office in April and talked to him about tampering. and he is a pretty calm guy, and his face was like simmering angry. And I wouldn't want to mess with Seth Luttrell when he's angry. And I think KG potentially leaving North Texas set off some alarm bells from a tampering perspective. And I don't know how much that had to do with him coming back, but it could have had something to do with it, for sure. I also think KD probably realized he has an automatic starting spot in North Texas. He's a featured player on that defense. Whereas at A&M, he would have probably just been a body. At Ole Miss, he would have been part of a rotation. So sometimes the allure of a bigger school is not always the most important thing. And I think KD in this process figured that out. And he'll be a really important part of North Texas defense next year. And if he's got a good season, he could be drafted. And that's just it's a calculus a lot of players at the G5 level are going to have to make over the next couple of years. Teams are going to be really aggressive in trying to poach them. But it's not always the smartest or the best move for that player to leave that school. Like sometimes I guess the cliche is the grass isn't always greener. And in this case, the grass was very green in Denton, so he stayed.
How do you think that college football could police tampering? Because to me, it almost seems to be impossible.
Yeah, I think it has to be on the conference level, not the national level. The NCAA has no bite right now in terms of enforcement in general. They can't do anything really. They're tied in a knot, scared of potential legislation and lawsuits. So if you want to police it, it's got to come down to people like Greg Sankey, like putting his foot down to those within his league about tampering. And the conference commissioners have to be very aggressive about it. And you have to come down really hard. It's very difficult to police. Don't get me wrong. Like a lot of it happens in ways that are difficult to track, but when you have situations, I'll use Tyler Harrell, for example. He was a wide receiver at Louisville. He entered the portal. Louisville had been fighting off him entering the portal for weeks. Alabama was always the rumored destination. He ended up going in. Everybody reported he was likely heading to Alabama, and like 5 days later, he committed to Alabama. There's some pretty obvious tampering trails there, and if that happens, and if you're really serious about enforcing it, I think the conferences need to really dive deep into that and make sure it doesn't happen again. But there are lots of reasons why we don't really see that in college athletics right now, but that is how you would have to really attack it, in my opinion.
Chris, I saw the Dave Aranda Q&A up on 247. You posted it. Did you actually do that interview as well with Dave Aranda?
Yeah, I was the one that talked to Dave Aranda.
Okay,
for that, yeah.
I just read the transcript of it. Just your impressions on talking to him about this upcoming season. Obviously, a lot going on with the Big 12 championship last year, and I know you got into the addition of Jackson Player and a lot of topics. What sort of stood out to you from your conversation with Aranda?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get to talk to David Aranda, it's an interesting thing. He's a very y'all are lucky in Waco. He's like a very introspective coach, very rare, as y'all know, with college head coaches. A lot of things stood out. He basically said at LSU he had turned into a robot without like a side to him other than his football kind of mad scientist. And he said something that I think a lot of us can identify with. He was like scared his kids would turn into him, and I think the way Baylor's changed him and his personality, he's become more of a full person. In terms of the football, I thought his explanation about creeper defenses was really interesting. Obviously, the 3-man front with the fourth pressure coming from the secondary or the linebacker level. So that was really interesting. Obviously, with Jackson Player coming in, Baylor's going to have one of the best defensive fronts in the country, 2 of the best interior linemen in the country. It's going to be a real strength. And then he also got into a little bit about Blake Shapen being the starting quarterback and why he went that direction. The ability to open up the offense from a passing perspective and to win games throwing the football, something that wasn't always the case last year for Baylor with Gary Bohannon. So I thought it was a really compelling interview for sure.
Hey, Chris, thanks for your time. Hope to have you on again. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Sorry about the phone issue.
No, that's okay. There's apparently on the chat room, they're discussing there's a bunch of sunspots going on right now that used to affect our satellite feeds and stuff like that as well. So appreciate Chris Hummer, 247 Sports. We have